Absolutely. So my background is across a range of instruments. I'm actually a singer and a choral conductor and a piano player by trade, and that's what I studied a long time ago. And that's actually how I know Jason with our connection through choirs, which is great. Um, so I'm going to share some thoughts a little bit around a lesson plan and what to do in terms of a one-on-one context or in a smaller group with some students. And further on, a little bit about ensemble planning and how to get the best out of your time when you have the kids as a group. But I wanted to start with this kind of question and this kind of first opening question to all of you. Why are you teaching brass? And what was it or who was it that inspired you? And why do you find yourself in this position all across Victoria, kind of leading and working with young people? And yeah, why do you do it? So I'd love to hear from a couple of you or all of you, if you wanted to share how you got into this and why you are involved in this.
Well, I'll start the ball rolling, I guess.
Good on you. Thanks, Ian.
I picked it up at high school. It was my saving grace going through high school. Not being a very athletic or sporty person, hated that side. So music was my salvation on more than one occasion. And over the years, made lots and lots of friends, associations with 13 and 14 bands over the years. And I believe in passing it forward, I guess. The kids need some relief from the pressures of the current climate, and music's a perfect way to do it.
Excellent. Thanks, Ian. That's great. Yes. Anyone else like to share? Yes, Tony,
yeah, I will. How I got involved was driving the bus to when we were doing things a little bit differently, and then because I'm not teaching to play, and then the bloke Rob, who was leading it at the time, asked, did I want to learn as well? Because I was helping anyway. So I'm not actually teaching, but I'm learning too. I'm learning to play an instrument as well.
That's
so
great.
I'm not a teacher. I'm you might call one of the students, because I'm still a beginner.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony.
We've got a few people that are learning to play as well while they're helping. So we've got parents learning to play as well.
Great. Thank you very much. I think Liz has put up a hand. Yeah.
Yes, my grandfather played in the Geelong Salvos band, and I've got connections to I'm like a fourth generation, I think. And so when my grandfather passed away, I picked up his instrument and started playing. And I've just found music to be so therapeutic in life. So I would just I like to pass that on if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I wanted to know if you would share, Brian Hogg, because I feel quite honoured that you're in this session, because we have played lots of your music and arrangements and kind of like band royalty in the room tonight. But Brian, how did you get into this? And I guess more importantly, why did you get into this?
Okay, I got into just brass because somebody at Ringwood who knew that I just retired rang me up and said, would I be interested? And I said, yes. I'm interested, I'm involved in music, teaching music. I don't know if I can give you a definitive answer, but I had an amazing high school music teacher. The biggest influences on my life musically was my father, who was a fine cornet player, bandmaster, songster leader. And yeah, like Liz, music is, I think what we offer kids in a music lesson, music is the smallest part of what we offer them. And I found that myself. I mean, community is really important, and community in banding is a high priority for me, and also that sense of achievement that you can get by just doing your part. Just doing a little bit. I remember teaching year 7 band once, and I can still see this little girl's face. She was in the second row right in front of me playing clarinet with her first rehearsal for the year 7s. And as soon as I finished the piece, I don't know what it was. It may have been Hot Cross Buns, I don't know. But she just said, wow, that made my boring part sound so good.
Mhm.
And I thought, gotcha. Because it's about that team mentality, and I think that's really important to develop. And like I say, I think for the non-musical things that we offer people, kids, adults, whoever, through music, the non-musical things are far more important than the musical things. The music is only a vehicle for that.
That's amazing, Brian. Thank you. That was unscripted, but exactly what I was hoping someone would say. Margaret, I can see you with quite a music library behind your background. Tell us maybe a little bit for you how you got into teaching and why you got into teaching.
Well, when Peter, my husband, and I retired, we were sort of recruited to help with Just Brass at Arndale, and I was basically a helper. A lot of the admin stuff still do, but I sort of fell into a bit of tutoring and also band leading because it was necessary for a time, but I'm now not doing that, which is great because we've got a tutor. But yeah, we find it's fantastic, the relationships we're building with families, and we have a reasonable number of kids on the spectrum, and to see them blossom is fantastic. And we've had some really good success stories musically, but the relationships we find are very rewarding.
Absolutely. Thanks, Margaret. Was there anyone else that wanted to share a little bit about their beginnings and why they got into teaching? Awesome. All right. Well, let's keep moving on. And this is unscripted and I haven't kind of teed anyone up to say anything specific, but it's really great. And what came out in the things that were just shared is really, this is about relationships and thinking about the why behind why we do this. And my life is very full. I've got 3 kids under 6. I'm married. I'm involved in some ministry things in church. And I also run a music department, which has hundreds and hundreds of students in it. And it's exhausting. And I would imagine that running your local branches and the programs that you do for largely as a volunteer is tiring. But I think it's really important every now and then to come back to the why. And it's really about relationships, about creating an atmosphere for those students to take a risk and to trust someone and to give something a go that they ordinarily wouldn't do. And I think really about creating positive memories and positive experiences for young people. I distinctly remember a primary music teacher that I had in a little primary school that I went to. I could play a little bit of piano at that time, but they just really kind of believed with me, encouraged me, and really set me on a path for doing some great things musically, but also just developing as a young person. And I think about, the hundreds of kids that we've had through our concert program, like similar to what Brian said, I've worked in high schools. So kids come in at the start of year 7 knowing nothing, hot cross buns and wombat shuffle and all the beginning pieces that we do. And at the end of it, look, less than 1% of those kids are going to go on and study music after high school. But what they remember is the things that they achieved together, the incidental conversations that happen at the beginning, at the end of a lesson, and just that someone is in their corner, encouraging them and being positive. And I think, we live in a really kind of crazy world. And, perhaps maybe 50 or 60 years ago, our society looked a little bit different. And the church and people of faith had a bit more kind of influence in the society and the culture that we live in. But that's really diminishing. And so I think the opportunity that you guys have with Just Brass is a really kind of beautiful thing and a really important and special opportunity that you have to speak into the lives of young people. And so I know that you do this, some of you have been teaching longer than I've been alive, and that is great. But I'm just here to, I guess, firstly remind you that let's keep it about the relationships and keep it about, being positive and providing that space for our young people to take risks and, just to develop as great young people. And I think Brian mentioned that music is the avenue that we do that. And that's certainly what I do, working with lots of young people. It's about developing, great human beings, and we get to do that through music. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about lesson planning and Now, I'm not quite sure, maybe someone can jump in and share with me. Do you have one-on-one sessions with the students, or are they in small groups?
We do both, Marty.
Do both?
One-on-one, one-on-two students usually in the schools, and then they come back to the church generally to do a group rehearsal.
Cool. And I think Stephen's driving there, but he's showing us 3 fingers. So that must mean 3 people in the group. Good work, Stephen. Don't crash your car. This would be terrible if we were prior to that.
I have, well, with the new load of kids I've got, I mean, I'm going to have groups of up to 6 or 8 kids.
Yeah.
On like instruments.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I can cope with that. The issue that you have is you start 8 kids one week in one group. Next week, you have 4 groups because they will all learn at different rates. They'll go home. Some will practice more than others. Some will be keen. And so I'm constantly changing groups. Usually every term I change the groups around to match kids that are sort of more evenly balanced with where they are skill-wise. So it's always a bit of a mix.
That's great. And I think what Brian's kind of talking about there is, I guess, differentiation and kind of straight away acknowledging and working where kids are at and trying to provide something for them to engage in. That's a really great strategy, which we might talk a little bit about later. I think it's always really important if you can, and Margaret said before that there's quite a few kids in her program on the spectrum, is to, as the schools allow or the parents allow, just to do your best to find out any information about kids that you might need to know, particularly around their learning. I've been teaching in schools for about 20 years, which is not that long, but there's this huge change. And when I first started, it's something like an individual learning plan, or even the autism spectrum was kind of like this thing that we sort of heard about, but wasn't really kind of in practice. And now I think 1 in 3 kids that I work with in the school has some sort of learning challenge and specialty. And I think just knowing that is going to set you up for a bit of a win if you have that prior knowledge about kids. And if they're coming from schools, they might already have some strategies that you could know or that you could kind of implement into your band rehearsals or into your one-on-one lessons. So whether that's an email to the school or talking with the parents, just the more you can know before you head into a session, the better set up you are and the better you're prepared. And I found that out the hard way by not doing that justice. And you get into a session and you're like, what is this kid got? Like, what's going on? And you've got a band program with 25 year 7 kids, and there's one kid kind of just going crazy and running around. And if I'd actually known that he needs some kind of behavior support before the session, it could have really changed the dynamic. So in terms of structuring your lesson plans and, with that idea of that relationships being the kind of center pin, I think it's really important just to begin your lesson with checking in with the kids. How is your week? What's happened on the weekend? Do you play sport? Do you follow a football team? Did you have something yummy, some takeaway over the weekend? Did you do an activity? Just to begin that process of relationships, because I think, as you know, what you're going to do is ask them to do something very out of the ordinary. No one these days randomly plays brass instruments. And as we all know, in the beginning, it can be a challenge to kind of get their embouchure happening and their breathing and make a sound that is kind of musical. And so if you're kind of basing that in a relationship, it's going to help you further into the lesson when you begin. In terms of repertoire, starting with something that they know or a tune that they already know is a really great point. And we've sort of joked about hot cross buns and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and those little 5-note songs, but a melody that they can recognize is going to help in that motivation to kind of keep going. And I've sort of reminded of this very recently. My 6-year-old son has just started some piano lessons, and the first lesson went well and he sort of picked up some notes, but the second lesson he sort of got the 5 notes down and suddenly has opened up this whole world of playing tunes. And he's like, Dad, like, you just come back tonight at 5 o'clock. I can play Twinkle Twinkle and Jingle Bells. And suddenly just, the teacher's just giving him these very simple songs, but he knows them and it's helping with his motivation to learning. And I think when you have a repeat lesson, similarly, starting with something that they know, so they have a sense of mastery and accomplishment, that they can move on. In a group setting or one-on-one, talking about a new skill and then straight away applying it. And you want to think about slowly introducing new things. So in a piano context, and I'm sure in the band method, it takes notes by notes. So you might start with C and D and then E, but always looking for opportunities to kind of apply some new skills and those skills that you've learned. And I think something that we often forget is presenting some music or having a little task in the context of your lesson that might be a little bit aspirational, that it might be a little bit harder, but you're always kind of trying to push the group or the person to be better. And I think sometimes in teaching for, Brian, he alluded to having a group of 7 or 8 students, and sometimes we just want to get them all playing the same thing and getting all that one note. But you're going to quickly realize that there are students in your group who are going to pick things up quicker. And you want to be kind of keeping on dangling the carrot and having something that might be a little bit aspirational. So the amount of kids in your lesson obviously is going to depend on, it's going to kind of constrain the amount of content that you can get through. But something that's really important towards the end of the lesson is, what are your learning goals for the week, and getting them to reflect on what have we just done in the lesson. And particularly if you've got lots of students, you might be doing a lot of talking, just like I am now. And, you're all sitting there kind of keen and attentive, but it's really important to, I think the teaching word is checking for understanding and making sure that the kids have actually kind of caught on to the concepts that we've been waffling on to for the last 20 minutes. And so, going around the class, or if there's 2 kids or if there's 1 kid, getting them to play the new notes that they have just learnt, or recognizing the pictures or in the sheet music. And then, depending on your setting up, whether it's digital on a computer or something written down, giving them some things to practice. And what I really love, depending on how old the students are, is getting them to write it down themselves. But what did they learn today? And what are they going to do? And maybe something that they have to come back next week having mastered. And I've just put on that slide, and I think we might share this PowerPoint if you want later down the track. But in that reflection time, did they already know something coming into the lesson? Is there something that they've learned today? And yeah, what are they going to practice? So obviously in our group tonight, there's a range of experiences, but I wanted just to open it up just for a few minutes. If there's anything anyone else has used in their lessons, in their individual lessons, that you think might be helpful to other people in the group. It might be a little activity or a questioning technique or something like that that they've used that they wanted to share.
A little tip that I got from Warren Hutchinson was using Staff Wars.
Yeah.
So sometimes when kids come in and they might be not very enthusiastic about coming into their lesson, everyone these days tends to like video games.
Yeah.
So I have the Staff Wars app, or when I was tutoring, had the Staff Wars app on my phone. So if I had any sort of difficulty engaging them, that worked a lot of the time, and they were still learning the notes.
Absolutely.
Just
and depending...
oh, sorry, you go.
No, you go. Yeah.
Just for 5 minutes or something, not for the whole lesson, because I, always tried to make them play more than, talking or anything else. But yeah. Absolutely.
And depending on what access you have to devices or iPads and that kind of thing, things like Staff Wars can also be a good kind of management technique. If you've got 2 or 3 students, you might say to one student, all right, you're going to do 5 minutes on this while I work with this individual student, and swapping over like that. So it's a good way to kind of keep them engaged with something while you might be working with another student. That's great. Thanks, Liz. Anyone else who wanted to share anything?
Yes. Yeah, we start ours with a few games before we go into the music.
Yeah, great. And do you find, Tony, that's engaging for the students and they enjoy that?
Yes. So things like dodgeball and so games like that, and it helps them to engage.
Yeah, great. And having a sense of fun. That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to talking about, I guess, the ensemble, and when you have an opportunity for a larger group of students to play together. I've written in here again, knowing the students, and I think this is particularly important if you're in a larger group of kids together in a room. And if you know particularly that someone's got some behavior issues or some, it might be an auditory processing thing, they might need to sit up the front, they might have hearing loss or hearing challenges or sight. The more information you know, you can kind of arrange some seating plans or to help facilitate the learning for them, but also help the pace of your lesson going along. It's really great that Tony shared about playing games, and I think dodgeball is a great game. It could get a little bit dangerous when you've got instruments around and chairs and music stands, but looking for opportunities, just for fun and to kind of break things up. I think one thing that's really important in our rehearsal sessions is to keep the pace moving, especially for young students. You don't want to be spending, 25 minutes on the one piece or the same 5-note scale, but looking for ways that you can break up small content into little bits that can be varied. Something, when I was working a lot with concert bands, was thinking about how we can link the warm-ups to the repertoire that we're about to present. So it could be, simple things like it's in a C major piece, so we're going to do a C major scale, or there could be a particular interval or a rhythm that might be tricky in the piece coming up, and thinking about, what could we do to teach that to the students in the context of warm-ups before we get to the piece. Singing is really good, and it's not about having a great singing voice, but getting the kids singing and even you kind of demonstrating that as best you can. But it will help with their intonation, it'll help with their rhythm and help with their tuning without getting the complexities of playing the instrument, kind of letting that get in the way. Another little trick that we've done before in concert band is singing the rhythms on the page, or using time names, ta, ti, ti, ta, or just da, 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 or picking a vowel sound. But before they get to producing the notes in the instruments, getting some mastery over the rhythms away from the instruments can also be a great way and help them kind of engage in the repertoire in a little bit more of a meaningful way. I think it's always good, probably not the very first rehearsal because they might not know anything, but the second rehearsal onwards to start with something that they know. Or it could be the warm-ups that they've kind of mastered. So they have a sense of, yeah, this is really good and this is going to be kind of exciting. And this is where my part fits within the context of the ensemble. I think after that, thinking about moving to some new repertoire. When we're starting with new repertoire, a little trick that I learned a long time ago from an American band person was actually to start at the end of the piece. And even if you only have a look at the last 4 bars or 2 bars, the way that our brains work, it's kind of really satisfying when we're getting to the end of the piece to kind of, oh, we already know that. And there's a sense of accomplishment and working backwards. And I think that's the same with singers. I often do that when we're introducing new pieces. Let's just go to the last chorus or whatever's going to happen at the end, have some mastery over that, then go back. I think the concept of moving in chunks is really important. I think if you've got older students who are more experienced, and sight reading something straight from the beginning to the end can be really purposeful. But when you're working with developing musicians, it's really important just to do little chunks. So you might start at the end, and we'll go to the beginning and have a look at those 4 bars. And then, all right, let's jump over to bar 16 and have a look at those 4 bars, and moving in little chunks to help get a sense of the overall piece. And when you think it's ready, then put it together, and they'll have a greater sense of satisfaction because, we know that bit, And even over the course of 2 weeks, it's like, oh, guys, we've nearly mastered this whole piece, Wombat Shuffle. We've got A section down pat. We've got C section. We're just got to do these 4 bars next week. And they'll begin to kind of get a sense of satisfaction out of the ensemble process. I think as pieces move from that introductory phase to maybe 2 or 3 weeks in where they're kind of learning the notes, it is really important to take some time for mastery. And so once they've learnt the notes, then going kind of beyond that, what are the dynamics in this piece? Are there any kind of articulation things that we need to be, thinking about? Further to that with, especially in developing musicians, what is this song talking about? What do you think the composer wanted us to feel as musicians when we're playing this? Is it a happy song? Is it a sad song? All those kind of things that we kind of just assume as more experienced musicians. But is it in a major key? Is it in a minor key? What tempo is this? You know, if it's a march, what does that even mean? No kids these days have any clue what a march is. No one marches around. Or if it's in a 3-time, what's a waltz? Or you know, if it's a samba or something like that, helping to kind of give some broader context to the music and seeing perhaps how it might fit into a kind of a real world situation or something relatable. Often on band music, there might be a little story at the beginning where the composer's written, you know, this is why I wrote the piece, or this has, you know, been inspired or based on this position. And I think sometimes even just reading that bio information at the start is really helpful and gives you a bit more context when you're kind of introducing that music to students. And yeah, as Tony suggested before, I think it's really important to finish with something fun. So whether it's a little percussion game or a clapping game or a rhythm game or just playing a piece that they really like, we want to try and finish our rehearsals and the ensemble time, yeah, with a positive experience. And remember, we talked about at the start, couching this in the context of relationships. And you know, not just the one-on-one lessons, but that ensemble time being a really fun time together and a fun time of learning and kind of taking risks and sharing together. Yeah, so that's all that I kind of wanted to talk about in terms of the ensemble stuff. But again, there's so much experience here in the room. Is there anything that you guys would like to share from your experience working with your ensembles?
There was one of the very first Australian Band and Orchestra Directors Association conference. James Barnes was the speaker, and when you put up there, know the students, one of his things was, and it comes up very often when I talk to people, is he would say, know your stuff, know what you are about, know your material, know who you're stuffing, know the kids, know who you can push, who you need to ease back on, who can you encourage a little bit more or a little bit less. And then, so it's know your stuff, know who you're stuffing, then stuff them. And
in an appropriate way, working
in an appropriate way, yeah. The other, so that's, I think it's really important to get to know the kids. Usually when I go to the classroom to pick the kids up, we walk back to the room where we're working in, and we just talk, what did they do over the weekend? You find out who's interested in football. Did they play football? How did your game go? Did you score? What, you know, stuff like that. Did you go camping? I've got some kids that enjoy camping. Just to get to know them as people. The other thing for me is games are great, and there's lots of music games you can play as well. Using the repertoire that you have, you know, hot cross buns. Get the kids to say, okay, go around and list all the kids. You play E, you play C, you play D. Go. Play the tune, but you're only allowed to play your note when it comes to that note. Or clapping a rhythm where, even if it's clapping 4 crotchets in a bar for 4 bars, but they're only allowed to clap the first beat, the second, the third, or the fourth beat. And just to have a bit of fun with that, but it's also reinforcing rhythm in particular. And I think particularly young kids, they need to know exactly where the pulse is before we get them to divide the pulse or even join 2 pulses together. They need to know where the pulse is. Also, other things that I've done is, you know, when we've done hot cross buns, the next week I'd say, okay, who can play hot cross buns? Now, can you play it like you mentioned a march? Can you play it like a march? Can you play it like a dance? Can you play it like you're happy? Can you play it like you're sad? And so they start using dynamics and different articulations. So they have to think more extra musically, if you like, not just about the dots. There's lots of musical games. Like last week with my kids' first rehearsal, I just put some 5-note rounds in front of them. Okay, let's play these. I will start rehearsal this week. So who can play this? Okay, now can you play it as a round? Just you 2, and challenge them to see. Okay, who are the people that are actually doing the work at home? And some kids will say, well, I didn't do it this week, but I'm going to do it next week because I'm as good as those. You know, the kids are sometimes your best encourager, because the kids look at us and say, oh yeah, that's easy for you, but you're old. You know how to do this. If you get kids to play it, they'll all go, "Oh wow, that's so hard." You know, that's great. You did it. You know, and I often think, for me, I for a long time I don't think it's the role of teachers to actually teach. I don't think it's our role to do that at all. I think our role is to encourage kids to learn, and there's quite a big difference there. If you get them to, they want to learn how to do things, then they'll go home and do the work themselves. For me, it's just a different way of approaching what we do. I can tell the kids, oh, G sharp, second and third, and I can tell them that every week they play that, instead of saying, okay, what's the note? How do you find it? Now look in the front of your tutor. It shows you how to play that note. Because when they're at home, they need to know how to fix that. You're not there to fix it for them. And if we keep telling them, it's little things like that. This is how this rhythm goes. Well, okay, find some sort of strategy to help the kids remember how that rhythm goes, so when they're at home, they can do it themselves. We take it for granted that, you know, they're going to remember some rhythms. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Brian. It's really good. And it's a real, I guess, blessing having your experience in the room. Is anyone else wanted to share something that's worked for them in their ensemble experience?
Something I remember when I was playing in a YP band as a youngster, the week that I'd done a lot of rehearsal at home, the conductor actually singled me out and said, I can tell you've been practicing this week. And I think that positive reinforcement goes a long way with kids to encourage them to get better and to do the in-between session work.
Yeah, absolutely. And even things like stickers, they're still, kids love getting stickers. And so you have a packet of shiny stars or something like that, and some simple thing that can encourage them and publicly acknowledge, you know, like Jay said, when they're doing it, really goes a long way. I was working with some grade 6 students this afternoon, and I sort of thought, oh, they're probably too cool for stickers. But as soon as I mentioned it, the behavior changed, and they're, you know, sitting up and attentive and actually listening to what's going on just to get a sticker. So I think that sometimes can be a really good strategy. Anyone else like to share anything?
Setting the culture too, because you're setting a positive culture there in your band rehearsal.
Absolutely.
Something that I've used in ensemble is, rather than picking out the naughty behavior, I make a big deal of the positive behavior. So yeah, to quieten them down, I'll just start writing names on the board of who's doing the right thing, and then everyone else would just, you know, be quiet or whatever, follow suit. And then I had a prize box afterwards that they could pick little, you know, cheap Kmart things out of, and that worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really great strategy and something we use in a classroom sense all the time. And yeah, I think ultimately, or quite often, when you have students who are misbehaving, it's really about attention. And so if you're kind of giving your attention to that negative behavior, it's kind of giving them, you know, what they want, but setting some poor expectations for the atmosphere and the kind of what's happening in the classroom. So that's a really great strategy, Liz. Thanks. Anyone else wanted to share anything that's worked really well for them in their ensembles? Stephen, is that your hand raised? So polite. And I think he's just arrived home.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've just had our first couple of rehearsals for the year with a brand new batch of kids. And I've got to say, brain breaks are important because, you know, rehearsal takes place after school, and majority of the times it probably goes for about an hour. Like, they may not last that long blowing the whole time. So it's important to break up your rehearsal and have brain breaks in the middle. So we do like a whole dance routine basically halfway through our practice, and then they're still learning about timing, they're still learning about rhythm, and it's done in an exciting way.
Excellent. Thanks, Stephen. That's great.
There's some great brain break ideas that Sue Anderson presented at Leaders Forum page.
I think we just lost you, Jace, there briefly. Do you want to say that again?
I was just saying there's a lot of great brain break ideas that Sue Anderson presented at the Just Brass Forum, the Just Brass conference last year, that you can check out on the Leaders Forum page.
Something that we do, Marty, at the end of our intermediate band, and we have done for a long time, is do the long note competition. So which engages all the kids and see how long they can play a note. Some of them have got onto it, and they'll play as quiet as they can and as low as they can. But we kind of change the rules from week to week. Play a note above this, or you need to play at least at mezzo forte or forte, that kind of thing. And we break it up into groups of the band, and then we have a finalist at the end, and then there's prizes at the end. And that's really positive way to finish things, because everyone's always looking forward to the long note competition.
Kids love it. Kids love it because it's pretty easy. You know, it's easy for them to understand what they've got to do, and they can practice it at home as you know, as long as they like. I usually add things like, okay, over 4 beats you've got to get softer, and then get louder over 4 beats, then softer over 4 beats, and then see how many times you can. So how many times can you play the C major scale up and down in one breath? You know, things like that. Or if for kids that have only got 5 notes, how many times can you go up and down those 5 notes in one breath? Little challenges like that, because it's pushing their technique, and they don't even think about it. You know, it's a challenge. It's very attainable by beginners. You know, it's good.
That's good. Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Martin. Thanks for sharing that. The school that I work in, we have a senior boys campus and a senior girls campus, and it's a private school, so it's a kind of different kind of kettle of fish. But the girls are very respectful and they kind of do whatever you say. But the boys are different. But as soon as you put an element of competition in the rehearsal, it goes to the next level. So it's a really good strategy, which I know that works. I'm just mindful of the time, and Jason said that we wanted to use 45 minutes, so we're kind of hit that. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for being a part of tonight, and just to encourage you and say thank you for what you're doing. And I know as someone who's in the kind of music world, I'm only here because of a really amazing teacher who encouraged me and pushed me on, even when I wasn't even that good. And I think what each of you are doing in the different places in Victoria that you are is really important. And as we sort of talked about at the start, and as each of you shared, you know, you just never know what's going on in the lives of these young people. And when they come to band and come to music lessons, you know, that little word of encouragement, that little bit of positivity, that bit of praise when they do something right, even if it's so simple, it can really go a long way. And I think for me, as a Christian and someone who works in music, I think this is kind of what it is. You know, we have a real opportunity to kind of show the love of God to these kids in a very kind of safe, non-religious way, but they can see, you know, in a really practical sense and get a sense of community and love and, you know, being accepted. And I think that's just, such a beautiful thing that you guys can do through the Just Brass program. So just really want to encourage you in the work that you're doing. Keep going, even though it's stinking hot. Whoever that lady said, it was 42 degrees where you are, it's going to get tiring. I know what it's like working with kids and particularly volunteering, but keep going and keep up this great work. And thanks for having me tonight.